Welcome to California Unfiltered, the podcast where we delve into the latest news, politics, and debates shaping the Golden State. I'm your host, Marc Ruiz Evans, and today we have a packed episode covering topics from California's secession movement to the impact of recent federal policies on our state. Let's dive right in. Our first topic today is the ongoing discussion around California's potential secession, commonly referred to as CalExit. Recent efforts have been made to place a measure on the ballot that would ask California voters to approve the state's secession from the U.S. Legal experts weigh in on the feasibility of this movement, with some arguing that such a goal is impossible to accomplish. Notably, U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has called for a national divorce, bringing secession discussions into the national spotlight. Well, I am the person that filed that petition. And it was approved in late January for us to begin collecting signatures. We have about 5.5 months to collect around 600,000 signatures in order to qualify the initiative so that it goes to the voters in the next election in 2026. We had been saying to many news agencies after the initiative was released for circulation that this was the best time for CalExit. Largely because the Republican Party is ascendant to a degree they never have been in a while. Trifecta governments come and go. And I've heard some liberals talk about how don't read too much into Trump's trifecta government. George W. Bush had a trifecta government too. It lasts, it comes and go. What I think a lot of liberal commentators are missing is that the Republican Party hasn't been this powerful in close to a century. You got to go back to close to 100 years to find where one political party owned the House, Senate, presidency, and the Supreme Court. It is, in fact, that fourth wall that makes them more powerful than any Republican Party we've seen since maybe the late 1800s. You have to go back around 100 years. Because of that, they have all of the votes they need to vote California out. If California successfully says that they want to leave America with 55% of the population, all they have to do is approach Congress, and the Republicans have enough votes and control of the legal jurisdiction to make it happen all by themselves without any Democratic support. Secondly, we also know that the Republicans don't really like California. Donald Trump famously said, while the Palisades fire was going on and winding down but still burning, and when people were dead, families were homeless, people were destitute, and people were in shock from one of the worst disasters California's seen in decades, the President of America said, I'm not sure I want to help out Californians because I don't really like you guys. He was backed up by Speaker Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. In the American federal system, the layers of power go president, vice president, and then speaker. So two of the top three most powerful people in America said to California, I see that you have dead bodies. I see that you have homelessness. I see that you're in shock. I see that this is one of the worst disasters you've ever faced. While you're reeling from the disaster, this is the time I want to remind you that I don't like you and I'm not sure I want to help you at all. That's enraged Californians. In fact, I was speaking to a Harvard professor of political science who said, quotes, you guys don't realize how much support you have for CalExit now. Donald Trump, in short, has basically created such a divide with California that he can never walk it back. People are livid now. I was here in the first CalExit movement in 2016 when Trump was first elected. The reaction was more of survival from fear, a deep concern that life may be different in a way and they may lose their sense of American rights they've always known. This time the reaction to CalExit is different. It's not based on fear, it's based upon pure rage. People aren't scared. They're enraged and ready to fight. I'm the most qualified person to make that statement. I met the most people in 2016 to 2019, and I'm meeting the most people now. The attitude of the people of California has dramatically changed from one CalExit event to the second one. And Donald Trump's comments in the shadow of the Palisades fire were possibly the main catalyst for that. Now, one of the other things we said was that the Republicans will vote us out. Look at what Trump said. Look at what Johnson said. We said that to many different reporters. Very fortunately, a week after we made that statement to about 30 different reporters, Marjorie Taylor Greene goes on X, Twitter, whatever, and says there is a secession petition in California and we should let them go. Huge boom for CalExit. We had been telling reporters for a week that the Republicans hate us and they will let us go with no problem. And then, unbeknownst to us, Marjorie Taylor Greene literally backs up everything that we said and epitomized the predictions that we had made. And that provided proof to a lot of people here in California and across America that we were right. Republicans don't like us and they'll let us go. You know, what Trump did and Johnson did and Taylor did are not exactly unique. They're not anathema. They aren't incidents out of the blue. Last year, Los Angeles Times did a poll, famously reported, 48% of all Republicans in America viewed Californians as not American. That's basically half of the Republican Party viewed California as not American. If you pull California out of those numbers, it's probably an even higher percentage of Republicans outside of California don't view us as American. Fast forward 6 months from that poll, and the Speaker of the House, the President, two of the top three most powerful people in America, say, I'm not sure we want to treat you like fellow countrymen. Rather, we want to treat you like foreigners who we don't exactly like. One of the stories I've been talking to Californians about is, so they can grasp this concept, is I said, if this was England, and the city of Leeds. Leeds is a city on the coast where the Beatles got started. Let's say there was a tsunami. And London saw the tsunami hit Leeds. And they were seeing this on television. And then London turned to Leeds and said, I know we're all Englishmen. I know we speak the same language. I know we've been part of the same country for a couple hundred years, maybe 1,000. But I don't know if I want to help you. Why don't you go ahead and let the dead bodies stay bloated on the beaches? Maybe I'll get to you, maybe I won't. I bring that up to people and I can see the shock on their face, but that's not the whole point. I then ask them this question. Does that sound like a stable country? I've asked 12 reporters that. I've asked 30 Californians. Not one person is able to say that looks like stability. That's what you'd see in a stable Western country. Rather, most of them say it's what you see in a country on the verge of civil war. Yes, civil war. It's quite obvious that what we're seeing is a breakdown of America and an introduction of norms that are more resemblant to a Central African government or a failed state in Latin America than they are the historical United States. In fact, a lot of CalExit people have been telling me that because of Trump, California now epitomizes the vision of the Founding Fathers more than America does anymore. Getting back to the ballot initiative, some experts have been weighing in now that the petition has been getting a lot of attention and a lot of media, is covered everywhere. There was a couple articles that came out last week that talked about how CalExit is not possible and is silly, a dream, and a waste of time. The main argument of these articles was that they had talked to a few they had talked to a few lawyers and scholars of law who said that secession is illegal. And so therefore California attempting to pursue secession is a pipe dream. It's a waste of people's time. Now, I read both of those articles and I found it very intriguing. After we got permission to collect signatures, I did about 12 different interviews with people, and we put about 20 pieces of information out online. In every single piece, I laid out 3 pivotal facts. Number 1, there is a Supreme Court case called Texas versus White. Number 2, in that court case, it says you can secede with, quotes, consent of the states. Number 3, Erwin Chemerinsky is the most famous constitutional scholar in California and the most respected legal expert, cited the most in all of America. And he said, when asked about CalExit in 2017 by GQ magazine, a simple majority vote of Congress could be all it's needed for California to leave America, because a simple majority vote of Congress was all it took for California to join. Now let's return to those 2 articles that are saying secession's illegal. Basically, the articles won't admit that Texas versus White exists. One of them wouldn't even mention it at all. The other one did mention it and said Texas versus White says you can't secede, period. That's also not true. That article that did mention Texas versus White forgot to mention that consent to the states is there. Neither article mentioned consent to the states, and neither article mentioned Erwin Chemerinsky's prediction. And basically, both of them misrepresented Texas versus White, and one of them wouldn't even mention it. And I think that's the pivotal part here. A lot of people, we're hearing people who may not support CalExit are out there, okay, but what we've seen from surveys is that the majority of the people in California who don't back CalExit have an opinion that secession is illegal and impossible, which is a lie and totally wrong. So can we say for sure they don't back CalExit? Because their understanding of why they're opposed is based upon falsehoods. Simply put, Texas versus White is a Supreme Court case. It's the only one on secession, and it does exist. It happened after the Civil War, which makes it precedent under the American style of legal system, not the Civil War. Cases and decisions that happen closer to the current time are considered more relevant than cases in the past. That's the way the American legal system works. Secondly, you can't ignore certain cases. Lawyers go to law school to learn case law, meaning a variety of cases already judged in courts of law. Simply put, lawyers can't just make up their opinion. They have to go out what courts had already decided and then base new legal arguments on those previous decisions. The concept's called stare decisis in Latin. It means case law. Namely put, in America, if you want to argue anything under the law, you have to show a case where that decision was made. You can't simply say, I'm really smart and well educated and this is my opinion. That's not how it works. There are common law legal systems that do work that way. But the American legal system is not common law, it's case law. So the question I have for professors and lawyers who say that secession is illegal is based on what case? And for the professors who say, and lawyers who say that Texas versus White doesn't allow secession, I would say based on what case? It turns out that one of the main critiquers here is a professor known as David A. Carrillo out of UC Berkeley. He was quoted recently as saying Texas versus White is there and it forbids secession, not mentioning that consent to the states was there and not mentioning Erwin Chemerinsky. What's interesting is that David A. Carrillo had said this before in 2017. We did an interview with reporter Jeff Horseman for Pacific Enterprise newspaper on the topic of CalExit pushing federal land being returned to the indigenous. And in that article, Jeff Horseman interviewed David Carrillo. And in fact, Jeff Horseman asked Carrillo a question that I asked Jeff Horseman to ask him. Does Texas versus White exist? And is the phrase consent to the states there? In that year, with reporter Jeff Horseman interviewing me and Carrillo for Press Enterprise on the article of returning land to the indigenous, Carrillo had to admit that in fact consent of the states did exist. He said it probably means the amendment process. And I think he called it a throwaway phrase. Here's the thing, when there's only one court case on secession, you can't throw away any part of it. You have to read it. Secondly, if Carrillo admitted that Texas versus White has the phrase consent to the states a few years ago, how did he accidentally forget to mention it again this time? He didn't mention it before. We told the reporter he was wrong. That reporter confronted him, and he was forced to admit that we were telling the truth. Fast forward a few years later, he's going right back to his original talking point before he was confronted. If he's in the news saying consent to the states exists in Texas versus White, and it's my opinion that it means an amendment, why can't he say that now in 2024? Why is he saying Texas versus White means an amendment, period? He forgot to mention consent to the states, and he forgot to mention that that's his opinion, and there's no actual case that he can base that ruling on that it means amendment. In the American legal system, there's something called the plain language or plain speaking rule. Simply put, you have to be specific about what you're talking about. So if you look at cases, a lot of law cases are very detailed about the crime and the specific area that was hurt or people that were hurt, dates and times, etc., especially if you look at contract law. You can't do this, you can't do that, etc. Basically, it goes back to this concept. If I wanted to ban all furry animals, and I wrote a law saying, I'm going to ban all furry animals, and somebody brings cats into me, and I go, I didn't mean cats, I meant dogs only. They could say, you didn't say that. You can't write a law that says furry animals and then say, well, secretly I meant dogs and not cats. That's why you have to be specific and use plain language when writing the law. Fast forward to now. If the Supreme Court said that only consent of the states is needed for California to secede, why did they not use the word amendment when the amendment process had been known to them for over 100 years. Why not use the amendment process if that's what you mean? Why say the phrase consent of the states instead of the phrase specifically the amendment process? Salmon Chase, the Supreme Court Justice personally appointed by President Abraham Lincoln, did not say the amendment process, was fully aware of the process, as was Lincoln, and used a different word instead. The only group of people who can tell us what consent actually means under the law is the current Supreme Court, now belonging to Donald Trump and the most conservative they've been in 90 years. Carrillo, even Chemerinsky, nobody outside of the court can say definitively what consent means. It's got to be defined by the Supreme Court. So it's interesting that articles come out saying secession's illegal, forget to mention Texas versus White, forget to mention consent to the states, and forget to mention Erwin Chemerinsky, the most cited legal professional, and forget to mention that he said a simple majority of Congress, and yet conclude, well, we talked to these experts and they said you can't do it. All that does is convince people that this is a silly idea by feeding them misinformation. That's not proper in a democracy. People should admit if they've already been forced to admit that Texas versus White has the phrase consent to the states. And reporters, when talking about a plan, should admit some of the things that I've talked about. They said I had no plan and there was no basis to it, no explanation. It's literally in the initiative we filed and in multiple interviews we've given. In fact, I've not given any interview where I didn't explain the fully legal process to full-blown California secession. To say that there's nothing there means you literally didn't look at anything before you gave an opinion. That suggests that the people who wrote that article didn't do their homework before they commented. Now, I don't know that for sure, but I encourage you to look at the articles that talk about how CalExit is illegal and see if Texas versus White there, consent to the states, and Erwin Chemerinsky. If not, they're intentionally trying to mislead you. Okay, moving on. California Assembly approves a $50 million counter fund to counter Trump's policies. In response to federal actions, the California Assembly has taken significant steps to assert the state's position. Details on the recent approval of $50 million by the California Assembly aimed at countering federal policies and the intended allocation of these funds and anticipated outcomes. Well, pardon me for a second. I'm going to pull out my phone. We did a little bit of research on this today. And let me see if we can find that. So I took a look at Governor Gavin Newsom's official proclamation of the $50 million funds and what it was going to, and we have an exact quote here. Second, let me pull this up. Whereas during President-elect Trump's first term, California developed a successful roadmap for fighting back and standing up for our state's values and our people's constitutional rights, including filing more than 120 lawsuits challenging actions taken by the Trump administration. And whereas lawyers from the Attorney General's office and my office have been preparing for a potential second Trump term for more than a year, and we are marshaling the arguments and evidence needed to be ready to challenge in court unconstitutional and unlawful federal policies and to mount robust and vigorous defenses of California's laws, policies, and programs on issues critical to California, and preparing to litigate regressive potential actions on these major policies with the urgency and comprehensiveness called for in this moment. So he's saying that they're going to Trump-proof the area of California by taking $50 million. $25 million is going to go to legal fees for undocumented people who are detained to help get them out. The other $25 million is going to go to suing Donald Trump in court and attempting to prove that whatever he's doing is unconstitutional. Now, when you look at Governor Newsom and Rob Bonta, they're going to act like they did really well and it's great and they were able to fight back. The interesting thing here is that the California government lost about half the time fighting Trump. You're never going to hear Newsom bring that up. You're never going to hear Bonta bring that up. It was about 50% of the time that the California government failed protecting Californians. Now, if you look at what Bonta's saying, the Attorney General, and you look at what Governor Newsom's saying, they never mention a percentage of success, and they act like they won all the time. That's not actually true. And let's go to this article here. This is from Politico magazine, California girds for war with Trump. And here we go. This is their angle. For months, officials have sought to Trump-proof California's climate policies, ensure up its disaster preparedness in anticipation of an adversarial federal government. A stark contrast to Trump's shock victory in 2016, which left the state leaders scrambling for a response. So what California leaders are saying is, last time Trump did better because it was a shock. We didn't know he was going to win. We didn't know he'd be doing all these things. Now we've had a year to prepare every legal argument before he even gets in. And so we're ready to go to court to challenge him. And that means we'll be able to push back against him. However, quote, advanced planning may only go so far. While Bonta will turn to the courts to try to stymie the president's agenda, as his predecessor Javier Becerra did dozens of times during Trump's first term, he may find an icy reception from the conservative-leaning Supreme Court. This is something I've been saying. When California fought Trump in 2016 to 2019, it was with a balanced Supreme Court, and it still lost half the time. This time, it's going up against the most conservative Supreme Court America's seen in 90 years. If it failed 50% of the time against the balanced Supreme Court, we can expect failure beyond and above 50% now that it's going to a Trump-laden, Trump-loyal, super conservative Supreme Court. You're not going to see many Californians like Bonta and Newsom bringing that up. We're going to lose harder than we ever lost in 2016, guaranteed. It's only one paragraph here in the Political article even mentioned that. I guess they don't want to, tear down the feeling. I do find it telling in this article that they mentioned that after Trump was elected, some of Trump's loudest anti-Trump voices took a more muted tone as the election turns rolled in. Adam Schiff, who parlayed his central role in Trump's first impeachment and the hearings on January 6th, did not mention Trump by name during his somber victory speech on election night. Governor Newsom also made no comment on election night as Democrats in the state were reeling from vice president's loss. If you're so willing you're going to defeat Trump and you're so prepared, how come you could make absolutely no comment the night he was elected? It's almost like you were in shock. Governor, if you were in shock that night, how prepared are you to fight Trump in the near future? But that's not all. I want to show you this article here. Again, this is something that the mainstream media is not putting a lot of attention in or covering. This has only been barely covered, but I'm going to show you here. It's an article that I did on Medium. So I'm going to read you some excerpts from an article I did 6 years ago. Nobody's really been interested in the topic until now. It's called "The Resist Movement Has Massively Failed to Protect California Against Trump." It's by me, Marc Ruiz Evans, December 3rd, 2018. So I wrote this right on the edge of Trump's presidency the first time. It's got a picture of a bear looking beaten up and Trump making fists. So don't expect to see any of this in the news, I said. I updated it in 2019 to say that, because the narrative is that the resistance movement is succeeding against Trump. However, buried in the back pages of news sites, a list is slowly building up of actions by Trump that have been backed by the federal government over the objections of California's people, government, and activists, aka the resistance. In summary, while California may have won a majority of its lawsuits against the federal government, this is only because Trump is an idiot and had little understanding of law. And so it's easy to undo ideas that he has that are completely without an understanding of how government works. However, sometimes Trump is right, and he can do exactly what he threatens, and the Supreme Court agrees with him and makes his wishes binding against California. California failed to protect its economy against Trump. A trade war has been launched against China over California's objections, and California's economy has lost billions and hundreds of thousands of jobs, despite everyone in the state saying they wanted to stop that. Trump has managed to cut down on skilled immigrant labor, changing the immigration protocol for people flying into America. He was able to massively reduce the flow of immigrants to work in agriculture, which also hurt the California economy. He's also managed to cut Obamacare, and hundreds of thousands of Californians are without health care now. Those are things that California said they were going to stop. They failed on that. California failed to protect its values from Trump and the federal system. The Supreme Court said that, 1, women and minorities don't have a right to class action lawsuits against discrimination. That's right. They also don't have a right to prosecute police who burst into their home without a warrant and accidentally gun them down in their own home. That's true. The highest court also said it's legal for businesses to discriminate against LGBTQ or specifically gay customers, saying, I don't want to serve you because you're gay. Additionally, the military can partially ban some LGBTQ citizens. If you're transgender, you lost the ability to participate in this branch of federal service. You got to go back to the Dred Scott decision to find a time where rights were taken away from a group. It's quite stunning. They also said it's legal for federal agents to pursue racial profiling of immigrants for policing. That means Latin people who look like me can be racially profiled. I can be thrown to the ground and assumed to be committing a crime even though I'm a third-generation citizen. Totally legal under the United States Supreme Court under Trump, and still today. California has failed to stop the funding of the racist border wall, which every politician said they were going to stop. They failed to stop the construction of the racist border wall, which they said, and they failed to punish California companies who want to work for Trump to build that wall. California politicians famously said the wall's racist, they're going to stop it, he won't be able to build it, nobody in California is going to help him. They lost on all of that. Total loss. And that was one of the big pillars they were pushing, was the racist wall. Completely lost on everything on that. California has also failed to ensure that 2/3 of its police agencies don't work with ICE officials, and that companies don't help ICE officials to do mass arrests of undocumented people. Javier Becerra, when he was Attorney General under Jerry Brown, told everybody, no police agency is going to work with ICE, and no California business is going to work with ICE, and we, the California government, are going to make sure of that. Turns out you can't do that. A lot of police agencies completely ignored you, didn't find you threatening, and you couldn't do anything to force them, and 2/3 of them continue to work with ICE against the will of the California people. Additionally, a lot of companies worked with ICE, even though you promised you were going to make sure they didn't do that. Total failure to make sure that the police and the companies didn't work with the racist ICE enforcement. Complete failure on that. Also, they lost on the undocumented are not held in an unlimited detention. So they lost on the ability to say you can't keep people basically in a prison forever. Trump won in the courts saying you can keep Latin people in unlimited detention for as long as you want. Basically throw them in the hole and forget it. Totally legal in America.
Now he's putting them in Guantanamo.
Now he's going to put them in Guantanamo, so it's the next step up. We also said that we were going to shut down these camps that Trump made so that people don't die in camps. That was a failure. Multiple illegal immigrants died in the detention camps in California. Citizens were captured and beaten up in the detention camps. California, although it promised, did nothing to protect those people or stop any of that. They also said they're going to stop Trump from being able to block people from getting asylum. They lost on that. Trump was able to block people from getting asylum. They also said they were going to block Trump from banning people coming into the country because they were Muslim. The Supreme Court backed him on that he could ban people from America based upon their religion, which goes against the entire concept of the American Founding Fathers. And the federal government can punish California by withholding funds because it chooses to protect the undocumented. Something California said could never happen. They totally lost on that. So, preventing Trump from engaging in a trade war, preventing Trump blocking skilled immigrants, preventing Trump blocking unskilled immigrants, preventing Trump from removing health care, parallel and significantly but consequential rail to the secession movement, California Act Movement. Right. Legal scholars and non-secession supporting California, as I spoke to, emphasize the legal ways that California can toe the line of what is permitted constitutionally, a nonviolent resistance to the imposition of law. That sounds great, but if you're a woman, you lost a right you were told by your mother and grandmother you'd never lose. Basically, that's a quintessential part of women's rights, and it was taken away. If you were transgender, you lost access to join a federal agency. Now, maybe there's a small amount of people who want to join the military, but like I said, you got to go back to Dred Scott to see where the court said, oh, did these people have rights? Now we're going to take it away. Minorities can be harassed. They can be gunned down by cops. They can be discriminated against, and there's nothing they can do about it. They don't have a right to a class action lawsuit against companies or police. Gay people can be discriminated against by businesses. Latin people can be racially profiled, held in unlimited detention camps, beaten to death, and nothing will happen. They can also be unlocked and undetermined detention for however they want. We can't enforce our local law agencies working with the federal government against the will of the California people, which means Latin people are terrorized because law enforcement decided they just don't feel like doing what the democracy says here. They also couldn't protect Latin people from companies helping to arrest them. They couldn't stop the border wall. And also in here there was plans to stop Trump's plan on drilling. And they lost on that too. Let me find that. Oh yeah, here's a picture of the young Latin male who was beaten near death. So it's real. He's smiling in this picture, and in the next one his eyes are shut. Oh, here we go. Agustina Arreola, Vincent Maradiaga, Sergio Lopez, Osmar Gadba, Igor Ziazian, Jose Hernandez, and Jose Bucio all died in the camps. You won't see their names printed in mainstream media for whatever reason. There was also, let's see here, California chose not to file the bill to attempt to block federal oil drilling in federal water. And the federal government can sell 45% of federal land in CA to oil drillers. So we weren't really able to protect our land on this. Additionally, Trump's retesting the ability to take away California's air quality regulations, and now he has the Supreme Court to back him. So California was not able to protect women, Muslims, transgender people, gay people, Latin people, basically across the board. I know there were successes, but when you hear about these failures, I don't see it as a big success that women, transgendered, gay, Muslims had to go, yeah, I live in a country where I don't have the same amount of rights. I don't see that as success. And where Latin people had to live in sheer terror with communities evaporating. I was in LA a few days ago. There are sections that would be bustling with Latin people. Ghost town now. Gone. Living in terror. So that doesn't seem good to me either. This is the second time we've returned to that. I think what we need is some honesty about how well the fight against Trump last time actually did and how well the fight in the future will be. I've never heard Bonta or Newsom say, we lost on land being drilled for oil. We lost on making sure that he couldn't remove our environmental regulations. We lost on protecting women. We lost on protecting minorities. We lost on protecting Muslims. We lost on protecting Latino people. We lost on protecting transgender people. We lost on protecting gay men. I've never heard them mention any of that. It's been years since the first Trump time. It's all documented. And yet when you look at Newsom, Bonta, and others, I have yet to hear them ever mention once all of those groups that lost last time when they talk about how good they're going to be prepared for the future. It's almost like they don't want you to know that they failed, that people fell through the cracks, that they weren't able to protect everybody, and they want you to think that it was a good job, they were totally successful against Trump, and don't worry, everything works and they're going to be successful against them this time. That's fantastical thinking. It's not reflective of the past, and it's certainly not reflective of the fight California will be facing when it goes up against the Supreme Court that's as conservative as it has been in 90 years or close to a century. We'll leave it there. I know it seems like we're going through dark times, and we are, but that's why I'm advocating for California independence. Thank you for watching this episode of California Unfiltered. We will be following the California independence movement, California versus Trump, current news, politics, and debates, and we'll have interviews with interesting people and other fun stuff. Please please subscribe so that we can get you updated on the future episodes. We will also be applying for White House credentials as an independent podcast, so you're going to want to subscribe and stay tuned in. Thank you very much.